An independent group of experts warned in early June that it's possible that a famine is underway in northern Gaza, but that the war between Israel and Hamas and restrictions on humanitarian access have impeded the data collection to prove it. The group known as the Famine Early Warning Systems Network, or FEWS Net, spoke about famine in Gaza, saying, quote, "It is possible, if not likely. Concerns about deadly hunger have been high in recent months and spiked after the head of the World Food Program last month said that northern Gaza had entered full-blown famine after nearly 7 months of war. But new research has cast some doubt on these reports. I'm now joined by Robert Walker from Honest Reporting to discuss the prospect of famine in Gaza. Robert, your outlet recently published an op-ed explaining that a famine never materialized. Can you explain exactly what the reports from early June got wrong?
Well, we're talking about a report from the spring, which basically maintained that famine was going to be quote unquote imminent in Gaza. Now, this was based on a whole host of different assumptions. This was not based, it's very important to note, this was not based on real life data that was happening, real life observations that was taking place. These were based on assumptions based on really a whole lot of spotty evidence where, there just wasn't a lot of ability to collect the data. And I'll quote from the subsequent report in June, which backtracked and actually said that actually there was no famine, even though it was going to be imminent 3 months later. And in the subsequent June report, it said, quote, the initial report relied on multiple layers of assumptions and inference, beginning with food availability and access in northern Gaza and continuing through nutritional status and mortality. In other words, and this is fine to have these kinds of assumptions, but what was irresponsible was when the world media, or huge swaths of the world media, and world leaders basically then took this as gospel truth, so to speak, and said, oh, it means, there's going to be imminent famine throughout Gaza. And of course, that never happened. And you don't need this report to look at that. You don't need to believe me. There's plenty of evidence, plenty of video footage and photos throughout Arabic language Twitter showing, bustling markets throughout both northern and southern Gaza. 50% more food trucks entering Gaza on a daily basis now than was entering before the Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7th. So I think that, if there was a lot of kind of just people taking a step back before this initial report with this doomsday scenario was taking place, I think that we wouldn't be seeing the kind of just disinformation and utter propaganda that was being disseminated in the news media. It didn't have to be this way.
And how much aid is actually getting into Gaza, and how does that break down in terms of calories per person per day?
So there's two different issues, right? So there's one issue about how much food is actually getting into Gaza, but then the other point is how much is actually being distributed. Now, in terms of how much food is actually coming into Gaza, bear in mind that there's plenty of food production still happening in Gaza. 75% according to the last United Nations agricultural report from a couple months ago, something like 75% of the greenhouses in Gaza were still operational. We're still having about 2 million pitas, right? The bread being able to be produced on a daily basis from bakeries in the Gaza Strip on it every single day. So we make the mistake on one hand of thinking that all the food coming in is really going to sustain the people, but actually this huge amount that's being able to be produced locally. But in terms of what's actually coming in, it's 1.5 times more than was happening 8.5 months ago. So there was a couple researchers from Columbia University in recent days actually combed together this really mountain of data and was able to find that there was more than enough food on a caloric basis to feed every single person in Gaza on a daily basis. So the issue is not about, full stop, the amount of food that's coming into Gaza. If there is an issue, it is about how food is being distributed. And guess who's responsible for that? The United Nations, and none other than UNRWA, the disgraced United Nations agency, which Canada and Canadian taxpayers helped to foot the bill of, who have members who are involved in Hamas, members who praise Hamas. And now we see that it's not just that, they're playing footsie with terrorists, that they are grossly incompetent, either deliberately or simply through incompetence when it comes to actually getting the food into Gaza. So if Canadians are upset watching the news and seeing issues of, not that famine ever happened, but actually seeing issues of food shortages, the finger should be pointed exclusively at the incompetent nincompoops that are running UNRWA and other United Nations agencies that are deliberately or otherwise preventing food. And you can see videos from on Twitter from Kojat, that's the Israeli agency actually tasked with coordinating food into Gaza.